Hi class, I'm Ashley Drudick. I will be your guest lecturer for Module 10. Today we're going to talk about barriers to access and technology, the considerations of the rural caregiver. So first off, I want you to imagine that you're visiting a foreign country, somewhere you've never been, you don't know anyone, you don't know where anything is, and think about a couple different questions. How are you going to navigate that country? Where are you going to find necessary resources? How do you feel when you can't find something that you're looking for or need? And finally, where are you going to go for assistance? And imagine, let's say you can't find that assistance. You can't find something in particular that you're really needing while you're in this foreign country. You might start to feel very overwhelmed, stressed, nervous, lost, confused, angry, anxious, or many other different emotions. This is how our caregivers feel when we don't put them in the care plan. So our family caregivers really need to be included in care plans to address their physical, psychosocial, financial, and mental health needs. Their concerns can be addressed through tools and strategies that help educate, empower, and support family members that are providing that care. The best way that we can allow our family caregivers time to express their concerns is by setting up a one-on-one meeting to further explore and discuss the concerns and create a plan of care to how to best care for the care receiver, but also putting an emphasis on that caregiver wellness. So what programs do we have in place to help our caregivers? We have the National Family Caregiver Support Program, which is actually an amendment of the Older Americans Act. It allocates federal dollars to over 650 regional area agencies on aging, or AAAs, to assist local communities to identify family caregivers through outreach, educational efforts, and provide no-cost or sliding scale fees. Some of the services they may provide include respite, caregiver counseling, support groups, caregiver trainings, community resource information, or individualized care planning. What's really neat about this program is that while each AAA is given federal dollars, they are able to assess their region and see what are the caregivers in their communities needing. So for example, our Northeast Nebraska AAA really focuses on caregiver support groups. That is something that has been really needed in their communities, and so they have a very strong program and spend a lot of resources and time developing those. While if you look at the Panhandle, you may notice that the AAA does not have any caregiver support groups, and that's because the folks out there don't feel like that's something that they need. It's not something that they're interested or feel that could be beneficial. So instead, the Panhandle AAA really focuses on caregiver education and trainings. And again, all of these services we know any caregiver could benefit, but what's really neat about this program is the AAAs can really look at who are they serving and what are their current needs and adjust their approach according to that. The purpose of the National Family Caregiver Support Program is to encourage and sustain the involvement of family members in the care of their aging loved one to avoid transferring the cost of care to the government. So as we know, there's a significant health crisis. We have baby boomers getting to the age of 65. They are starting to have health conditions and health concerns, which is going to cost us a lot of money in comparison to how much it's cost in the past. Another thing is that we know is that having someone at home actually is a lot less expensive than having someone placed in a facility, but also it provides better care. And as we know, it's very hard sometimes to find Medicaid resources or organizations that accept Medicaid payment. So our folks that are low income and need those services are able to find them. It's definitely a challenge, and that's something we really start to see in rural Nebraska. So what kind of professionals might be utilized during the process of putting that caregiver into the care plan? We may see a caregiver coordinator, and their job is to really assess each caregiver's situation and assist them in developing care plans to address both immediate and long-term care needs. We also might see a geriatric care manager. This is typically paid for privately or through long-term care insurance policies. They assist older adults, their families, and the professionals in the community with identification and coordination of services designed to address specific care needs in the home or in care facilities. Their core components are assessment, care plan development, implementation and coordination of needed services, monitoring, reassessment, and discharge. So before we get too far into this, what is a care plan? So a care plan is really a blueprint of actions that may be implemented by a care receiver, family, and/or care manager to direct steps needed to reach agreed upon goals. What we're really determining during this is looking at aspects of safety, quality of life, and self-determination of the care receiver and the caregiver. And finally, it offers recommendations on type, frequency, service provider options, costs, and length of services needed. Again, a care plan is never to say you must do this or you have to do this. Really what we're trying to do is create a guide for our caregivers, because as we talked about at the beginning with our little activity of being in a foreign country, it can be very overwhelming and a little bit scary if we don't know where to go, what we need, anything like that. So what professionals can assist with developing the care plan? We may see caregiver counselors. Their job is to really help guide the caregiver on a journey of self-discovery and realization by offering tools and coping strategies to help the caregiver gain strength and confidence necessary to execute other actions needed to improve caregiving situations. We also might see some family care services, which they create a vital linkage for family caregivers to a wide variety of services and programs to assist caregivers in their role. Now, there are some professionals that assist with actually just implementing that care plan, and typically those are our mental health professionals. They really help caregivers identify and apply strategies, perspectives, and behaviors necessary to implement the care plan. Because it is very easy to get that plan and it sounds great, but sometimes it's still very overwhelming even with that written out care plan that's step by step. So that mental health professional can really be a coach in helping them make those first steps, overcoming that fear. And really together, all of these professionals that we just talked about create an approach to caregiver wellness that provides a framework for accessing ongoing information, problem-solving strategies, and emotional support through the caregiving experience. So while we've talked about that, and that sounds wonderful, right? We really want to talk about the rural caregivers, because unfortunately in rural Nebraska and other rural communities outside of Nebraska, many times we do not have access to such resources. So I brought up a couple statistics that I found really shocking. So more than half of the 65 million Americans living in rural areas are over the age of 50. Elders in rural areas, or a quarter of all elders, are more likely to reside alone, near or at poverty level, and suffer from a chronic condition or physical disability. They typically travel 46 miles, to get to the nearest health professional. Caregivers who care for people living in urban areas are more likely to report using services than caregivers living in rural areas. Specifically, urban caregivers tend to request financial information, use of transportation services, and use of adult daycare, more so than our rural caregivers. And I find that very, very interesting because I work a lot in rural Nebraska for my job. And one thing that I do see is when you get out to the panhandle, there's not many programs for adult daycare. Respite care is very difficult to also obtain just because of the lack of providers. And many times, because in these rural communities they are so spread out, they don't always know about services that are serving them because they may not have a local office in their community. So before I get too deep into that, I feel like it's really important for us to define what is frontier, rural, and urban communities. Now, unfortunately, these definitions can vary a lot, depending on who you ask, what study, research, or agency is doing the evaluation. But typically, these are your guidelines. So an urban county is densely populated and must encompass at least 2,500 people, at least 1,500 of which reside outside institutional group quarters. Now, our rural counties are the population, housing, and territories not included within urban areas. And finally, a frontier county. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I did not know until this last year that frontier counties actually existed. So I've kind of been shocked by all of this, and I've really become passionate about our rural caregivers because finding out about the lack of resources. So a frontier county is a sparsely populated rural area with a population density of 6 or fewer people per square mile. A lot of our frontier counties here in Nebraska actually fall in northeast Nebraska as well as Panhandle. And I did, part of the materials for this week, I did include a map. It's from 2010 U.S. Census Bureau. Unfortunately, that is the most up-to-date one, but it does show all of our counties and it does classify them as urban, rural, or frontier. And so for any of you that might find that interesting or would like to learn a little bit more about that, I found that really neat, so I really wanted to share that with all of you. So what are some of the barriers for rural caregivers to services? So the lack of organizations providing services. Unfortunately, after Lincoln, sometimes people get forgotten. Or even after Kearney. Sometimes they do come out to Kearney at least and serve the Tri-Cities, but after Kearney, North Platte, Shadron, Valentine, Scottsbluff, many times don't have organizations that are willing to serve their constituents. We also lack a lot of professionals to provide services. So many times, if you are a healthcare professional, you may see ads for ads or incentives for student loan reduction, hire-on bonuses, sign-on bonuses, things like that, because of the lack of professionals. Unfortunately, most people don't find it very exciting if you're a trauma nurse to go work in Scottsbluff, Nebraska at Regional West versus working at Bryan LGH at their West Campus in Lincoln. The travel time. So like we talked about in one of the previous statistics, 46 miles on average. Many times, and again, I'm talking a lot about the Panhandle just because I work out there a lot. Many times our folks in the Panhandle, to find a specialist, even someone as simple as a neurologist, they have to travel outside of Nebraska, which typically goes to Colorado, Wyoming, and or South Dakota, depending on what part of the Panhandle that they are in. Complications with cell phone and internet services. So sometimes I wonder if it's really the Wild West when I go out there, but there are many times you will lose cell phone service and internet services aren't always available. They also lack family and friends to provide assistance to caregiving. The family societal norms. So when you're looking at rural Nebraska, you're typically looking at a lot of farmers. Not everyone is a farmer, but the mentality is very much you take care of your own. Family takes care of family. Family is your first priority. And that's a little bit different than our urban communities and our current society, who many times we're looking at myself and what do I need to do for me, or having someone come in because it's convenient to help with that. Unfortunately, our folks in rural Nebraska and any other rural communities really do not want other people coming in. They feel like it's their obligation. And finally, there is lack of jobs and low wages going out in rural in rural communities. So that really limits a caregiver. So I might be caring for my mom in North Platte, Nebraska, but if I can't find a job or my wage is really low for something that I'd be making double the amount in Lincoln or Omaha, it may be very difficult for me to take care of mom and continue to work full time. It just might not be feasible. So some potential options for services. So we're starting to see a lot of things going on, such as telehealth. So telehealth, for any of you that don't know, is a healthcare professional. So this many times is like a geriatrician. Some neurologists are starting to do it, psychiatrists, really specialized healthcare professionals that unfortunately many times in rural communities we don't have, are able to basically Skype is the best way to describe it with a client and make recommendations. So maybe they can't travel, or maybe they just don't have a lot of time, and this is the way that they can do it. It's not as personal kind of care, but it is definitely a better option than what we've had before. Online resources. So I can tell you in rural Nebraska, we're slowly getting around to utilizing online resources. We're a little behind the curve. So that is something that's starting to be used. Again, a lot of our elders are not familiar with it. Not everyone has access to getting internet where they live if they're in really rural areas. The utilization of helplines and hotlines, brochures or other materials that might be helpful. And finally, local agencies. So when we're looking out across Nebraska at some of our rural communities, some of the big agencies that we see are obviously our AAAs, Nebraska Respite Network, but then each of the areas really has other resources. So for example, the Alzheimer's Association added a Kearney office a few years back and is now looking at adding another office in another area of Nebraska in Northeast. So that's really exciting. We've also seen the Brain Injury Alliance is looking at providing an office in more central and western Nebraska as well, which again are very specified for caregivers, but it's exciting to see that people are excited to start serving people outside of the Lincoln, Omaha communities, because there's definitely a need. So like I've talked about a lot during this presentation is the Panhandle. And I like the Panhandle because it's about as rural as we can get here in Nebraska, and I feel like we can all relate. So any of you that have never been to the Panhandle, maybe don't exactly know what is the Panhandle, I did provide a nice little picture here. And the brown region is the Panhandle, all right? So it is actually 14,138 square miles, or 18% of Nebraska, and has 36 villages or towns. 5% of the population is housed here. The elderly population, or 60 or older, of the Panhandle is over 20,000 citizens, or 24% of the total population. Now, I'm not going to lie, I'd never been to the Panhandle to this last spring, and I was in for quite the trip. I did not realize that sometimes they did not have access to cell phone service. I've never had that happen. I also didn't realize how small all the communities were out there, but also how spread out they are. So Shadron's 2 hours away from Scotts Bluff. Alliance is an hour from Scotts Bluff. Sidney's about an hour from Alliance and Scotts Bluff. Those are your 4 main communities out in the Panhandle, and they're all very, very much spread out. Another concern that I failed to mention earlier was that there's actually a time change that happens. So you're actually in mountain time. And so sometimes if we're saying our office hours are 8 to 5 Central Standard Time, that might not be very convenient for them because they are an hour behind us. So overall, some of the conclusions I wanted to talk about are that rural caregivers really struggle with caring due to lack of resources available to them and the care receiver. Rural caregivers are definitely an underserved population. The need for more research to be done. So I really struggled to find a lot of research-based journals and articles to refer to, but also even finding statistics. There's just not a lot out there. And with some of the statistics we did talk about, it's really surprising that there hasn't been more research done in these areas. We also see that the needs of rural caregivers are different than urban caregivers. As a side note, I wanted to mention part of my job is working for the Alzheimer's Association. So part of my goal has really been to stimulate some trainings, doing some support groups, really just providing services. And it's been really neat. So I wanted to share a few of those statistics with you guys just because it's made a huge difference. So prior to last September, we really hadn't been out in the Panhandle for probably over 10 years. And so one of our staff decided, this is something we really need to do. We're really excited. How can we engage them? And had started making routine trips out. Well, I traveled out with her in April of this year, and I was shocked. I was like, wow, this is so different. This is, not at all what I was thinking it would be. I thought it would be, a little bit more populated, not so desolate. Didn't realize how far it was out there. And so what's really neat is I've been able to work with the AAA there, the Nebraska Respite Network coordinator out there, a lot of their critical access hospitals, things like that, to start providing services. So we did 3 workshops out there in August, and they had 3 educational components to them. They had 3 different workshops within themselves, and we had over 292 participants, which is phenomenal. For one, that was the first time we'd ever done it out there, and we did it in Sidney, Chadron, and Scottsbluff. But also, we started some support groups, and our support groups average 12 to 14 folks every single meeting, which is very good. Lincoln and Omaha support groups typically maybe are 2 to 3. Some of them are a little bit bigger, but they take a long, long time. People are just not always reaching out. And what we really realized as a team was the need for education and the need for services in the Panhandle, that people feel so alone. They don't know where to go. They don't have the resources. They don't have organizations that are reaching out saying, yeah, we'd love to help you guys, even though we're based out of Omaha. And so what I really hope that you guys take away from today is the specialized needs of those rural caregivers, but also how can your agency or in your position really reach out to these folks and provide more care and support to them, because they are desperate to get anything to help them. They are the most phenomenal people that I have met. I've recently just started working in Northeast Nebraska, and we're kind of doing that same model because, again, that's another neglected area of Nebraska that many times doesn't have services. So really think about, how can your agency really work to better serve our rural caregivers? And finally, here's my bibliography. I have included some resources as part of this presentation for you guys to read, a couple journal articles that I found very helpful. Also that map of Nebraska specifying if it is a rural, urban, or frontier county. And then I also included a YouTube video, which I was hoping to embed into this presentation and could not get to work. It is about our rural veterans, and it's a very quick clip, but it is wonderful, and it really sums up everything that we talked about today. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Have a great day.